Food is something very existential, and it's something very fundamental to human beings. And so people, even if they don't understand the intricacies and complications, say, of genetic engineering, they get naturally suspicious when they suspect that their food is chemically contaminated or genetically modified, and the secrecy of the corporations heightens that suspicion.
Farmers around the world are in trouble. Why are they in trouble? They're in trouble because there's too much food. There's too much, and it suppresses prices. So those farmers are highly susceptible to a crop, a seed, a product that will slightly reduce their costs. Even if the long-term effect is detrimental to their soil, to themselves, even to their family. And you see it in India, you see it in America, you see it in Canada, you see it in Argentina.
5 or so agrochemical corporations control about 85% of the food, and what they want to do, in their own words, is gain control over the entire food chain, from the seeds to the table.
Corporations are putting a gene from another species into germplasm to create characteristics or traits which are more desirable to whom? Well, in most cases, these traits are desirable to agribusiness. That is to say, companies who are mass producers of corn and soybeans. Generally, mass producers of food that goes to cattle to make meat. The danger of this is really unknown. Scientifically, we are on a threshold that we have never crossed before. We simply do not have the expertise to judge whether we know what we're doing or not.
Monsanto, one of the corporate giants in this field, engineered soybeans to make them resistant to a specific pesticide. Now, it happens to be a pesticide sold by Monsanto, of course. It's called Roundup, so these soybeans are Roundup ready, as they say. The purpose is not to increase the yield of soybeans, the purpose is to sell more Roundup. They have other crops that have a pesticide in them, and they want to sell these special seeds. Now, they have patented the seeds, they sell them for inflated prices, they charge a technology fee on top of it, and then they have intellectual property rights so that farmers are not allowed to save the seeds or develop them as farmers have done for hundreds of years.
So they buy the seeds, but they don't own the seeds. They have a license to use it for 1 year. The next year they have to buy it again. So now they're just like somebody who's been enticed to use drugs and now has to form a relationship with their dealer, right? Who has the power in that situation? The dealer has the power.
In Europe, where the anti-GM movement is much stronger, the English supermarkets have agreed not to buy GM food.
So the industry now knows that neither Europe nor US is the place where they can keep this expansion on. And they're moving to Asia. And they're trying to push this technology on India by violating every rule under the sun, every environmental law that we have had, corrupting our scientific institutions, our government. And that's why I've sued them. I've got Monsanto in court, in the Supreme Court of India, because they're violating our laws.
Hunger is not a technological problem. The world produces enough food. So you may ask, why are there so many hungry people? Well, they're hungry people because the food is not distributed to them, it is not offered to them. Hunger is a problem of food being concentrated in the hands of the rich and powerful, and poor people not having access to them. Well, GM food is going to perpetuate that. In fact, it's going to make it worse. It's going to increase poverty, it's going to increase hunger.
So it is not a strategy to produce more food, it is a strategy to undermine small farmers' livelihoods, create ecological risks and create health risks. India can do without all this.
Life has evolved for over 3 billion years, and there is a wisdom in the organization of natural living systems, of ecosystems, living organisms, that we should take to heart.
We have never had a worldwide famine, and there's no reason to. But should we follow what these companies are proposing, it'd be very easy, because if the characteristics or if the traits in these seeds should fail catastrophically, they will fail worldwide.
The biggest difference between classical plant breeding and genetical engineering is that in genetical engineering you go much more specific for the characters you are interested in. In plant breeding, you always combine a huge number of genes and you have to do a lot of selection. In gene technology, you take the best plant already available and add the few characters you are interested in so that your breeding efficiency is very much increased.
Potatoes are a good example of our breeding efforts. Over the centuries, traditional plant breeders have turned the wild potatoes that are still found in Peru into the wide varieties of potatoes that we can buy today. Because of these efforts, potatoes can be grown all over the world. The varieties of potatoes we grow today are different from their wild cousins. They've been genetically modified through traditional plant breeding, so every variety of potato differs slightly in its DNA. This is the DNA extracted from a single potato. DNA contains genes that make that potato what it is. Genes are sets of instructions for making different proteins. And it's the proteins that determine the exact properties of the plant. Genetic engineering involves adding an extra piece of DNA to a living cell. Scientists will have studied this piece of DNA for many years before putting it into a cell. Inside the cell, special enzymes cut a length of potato DNA into 2 halves.
Transgenic fish are bred to grow faster, be stronger, and they have a tremendous advantage over the wild fish population. We don't know what this might do to us, or our children, or our children's children. And the government needs to become more active, and at the very least, label it so we know what we're eating. It's just so unfair for people to work in ignorance, even though they care, even though they want to know. If the government doesn't cooperate, we're all victims of big food.
This is our seed store. The big amount of seed that we need for large distribution are in these. Okay? The The walls are made of cow dung plaster, and the painting has been done by a tribal farmer who visited us. And at night he used to just get up and paint our walls with this beautiful imagery of biodiversity and sustainability. And the different conservation seeds are protected in this seed bank. Navdanya is very fortunate to have a bija whose name means the seed. Seed means the bija, and this is bija. And Prithvi, whose name means the earth. We have the seed and the earth in our team, and of course we have Darban and others. Darban means the protector, and he is the protector of seed. But Darban and Bija can now show us the seed conservation. We don't take shoes into our seed bank, so we don't bring any diseases in. The seed bank, community seed bank, where we conserve seed diversity at the level of farmers. We don't want a high-tech, high-cost system, so farmers enter and say they can do it, but we can't. We want to inspire every farmer to be able to be a seed keeper and a seed farmer. Right here, we have among our 265 rice varieties that grow on this farm, a bhatkalon, a rice that is used as the first weaning food for infants. It is used as a rice for women who have problems in pregnancy, and it is used for very, very old people who cannot eat an ordinary food. This rice is a healing rice. More black rices, red rices, brown rices, golden rices, long-grained rices, short-grained rices. We used to have 200,000 rice varieties in this country, and the Green Revolution tried to breed one variety at a time, and each of them kept failing. Because the Green Revolution was not successful in wiping it all out, we have been able to work with farmers, with Bija, with Darban, to be able to bring this issue back. At the consumer level, it is now quite clearly recognized that there is not a single consumer in the world who would willingly ask for food in ignorance about what it contains. Everywhere people are asking for labeling, everywhere people are asking for the right to choose and the right to information, and most places, people with that information are saying, we don't want this stuff. Our food is better off without genetic engineering.
Every time you walk into a fast food place, every time that you buy conventional vegetables, you and I am responsible for the pesticides being used, the incredible cruelty to these animals, the destruction of our forests and wildlife, and 70% of our endangered species are created through farming and ranching in the United States. We're complicit in those moral crimes, whether we know it or not. And so it's not just an environmental crisis, it's a moral crisis, and we're never going to solve that by being mere consumers. We have to say, no, we are creating either the solution or the problem.
One of the main risk issues of genetic engineering is that 95% of all competent scientists in these fields are working for the producer side, and only 5% are really genuinely independent. They never discuss that, and that makes me suggest that maybe the situation is even worse, because I have no data for this. It's my own invention. The reason I mention it is, of course, that the day the percentages are 100 working for the industries and 0% that are really independent, then we have both a very serious scientific problem in the society, but we also have a very, very serious democratic problem, as you may imagine and realize.
Research that's used by the biotech industry for their claims for safety have been described by other scientists as rigged to avoid finding problems. They over-pasteurized milk 120 times longer than normal. They heated corn 4.5 times more than normal before searching for intact protein. They used mature animals instead of young ones in feeding trials. They diluted their soy 10-to-1 before feeding it to the animals. They omitted the most incriminating research about differences in nutrients between the genetically modified soy and the non-genetically modified soy.
The federal government is not ensuring that our food is healthy. The state government is not ensuring that our food is healthy. There is not an effective regulatory mechanism in place.
The FDA does not require even to be notified by a biotech company if they're going to introduce a genetically modified crop, although most companies say that they participate in a voluntary consultation in which they meet with an FDA person to discuss safety. They can show the summary data, choose what data they want to show, and they receive a letter from the FDA saying that the biotech industry company believes its own foods are safe. One company was an exception, that's Calgene. Calgene created the Flavor Saver tomato, designed for longer shelf life, although it's off the shelf so it didn't work, and they introduced it as the first genetically modified crop. So they asked the FDA to actually look at the detailed studies of a feeding trial. They fed the tomato to some rats. Actually, they force-fed the tomato because the rats refused to eat it. Several developed stomach lesions. And if you read the actual documents from the FDA scientists, they said there are outstanding questions about safety related to these stomach lesions that have not been answered. And yet the FDA approved the Flavor Saver tomato. It also turns out that 7 out of 40 rats died within 2 weeks after eating the genetically modified tomato and were replaced in the study without explanation. Recently it was found that rats that were fed genetically modified soy had misshapen cells in their livers, and no research has been done to follow that up. In June of 2003, scientists reported that the gene sequence of the inserted genes into crops had actually changed their order. They had re-scrambled. So the genetic inserts are not stable. Another laboratory confirmed this and found that it had changed in the same varieties in different ways that they had tested. So not only is it unstable and changing, it's not even uniform in the way it's changing. This is incredibly dangerous. A genetically modified food supplement called L-tryptophan was responsible for the deaths of about 100 Americans and caused 5,000 to 10,000 people to fall sick in the 1980s. The biotech industry claimed that the Japanese company that was genetically engineering its bacteria to produce this food supplement more economically, that bacteria wasn't the problem, it was a change in the filter in early 1989. However, new information shows that hundreds of people got sick during the 4 years prior to the change in the filter. Now, what does this mean? It dismantles this alternative explanation and puts the blame squarely on genetic engineering. What's really a shame, however, is that the Food and Drug Administration of the United States knew this information and never went